welcome to the third of our conversations with our local candidates for the general election. I'm Tim Lala and Vice Chair of Zero Carbon Harrogate, and this is Jemima Parker, who chairs the organisation, and it's great to have Conrad Whitcroft with us today, who is the Labour Party candidate.
Thank you for having me, Tim. It's great to be here.
Good, great. We appreciate you making time in your busy schedule to talk to us. Really, we perhaps know you less than we know the other candidates. So give us a bit of a biopic as to how you got here today.
Yes. Well, I'm Conrad Whitcroft, as you said. I'm the Labour Party candidate for this constituency of Harrogate and Knaresborough at the general election on the 4th of July. I've been a Labour Party member all my life since I was 16 years old when they let me join. And I've lived in North Yorkshire. I live in York. I live in North Yorkshire for 7 years now. So it's a long, long time. I came here for university, fell in love with the place all over, and I'm so proud now to see that we've also got a combined authority. Harrogate and Knaresborough and York are really not that far away, but now we're under the same combined authority run by David Skate, the Harrogate-born mayor, who's a very good friend of mine, and I could tell you a few stories about him as well, if you want, but maybe once the camera's off. But I'm really proud to know that we're under the same combined authority, and that means we need to work together. And we were talking a bit earlier about the coalition that you've built. It's not just Zero Carbon Harrogate, but it's a number of organisations all across North Yorkshire working together. That's what I want to do. And you talk about sort of the locality aspect. Electing an MP is not just electing a souped-up councillor. It's about someone who's going to be that national representative and work with what the national government will be. Now, I've got experience as a local councillor, but I also worked hard during the COVID pandemic when I worked for a local authority, helping with COVID recovery, particularly from a business perspective as well, and how we can make sure that we work together effectively as a community. I think we learned a lot over the pandemic, in fact, and we learned that who we had valued least in society in the run-up turns out to be the people who were essential to keeping us going and keeping us alive. And I think that's what has made a lot of people consider their views about society and consider their views about, I think, the Labour Party as well. So I think that we've been through an awful lot in the past 4 years. Goodness knows it's been incredibly hard for so many people. I think it's time for a change. It's time for a fresh start. Now that's why I'm standing.
Before we get on to your pitch, let's just dig back a bit. You said you became a Labour Party member when you were 16.
That's right, yes.
So where was that? Where were you before?
So I'm from Northampton originally, so that's where I started off back in politics, cutting my teeth down there. Yeah. Now,
and then you came to University of York.
That's right, to do politics. Yes.
To study politics.
Surprise, surprise.
So you would say, did you come from a very political family or?
Mixed political family, yeah. I've said it a couple of hustings so far. My mum is a Conservative. Right. My dad was a militant, so I've got a very
interesting.
I've got quite
interesting discussions in your home.
Very interesting. Yeah. I'm the middle of 3 boys, and my older and younger brother are not interested in politics at all. Right. But I clearly picked it up from both my parents. So yeah, only time they ever argued was about politics. So right. it was a very happy upbringing. I've had very lucky to have that lovely childhood. But yeah, absolutely. When it came to politics, it was just like chalk and cheese. Yeah. But that's also what's encouraged me to think a little bit more about how can we be respectful and understanding of one another, even if we do disagree. Yeah,
indeed. That's an interesting background. Clearly sided with your father, but not quite so far
as to the left as my father, but not so far to the right as my mother. Often in between, trying to hold.
So you went to university and you now work in insurance, I gather?
That's right, yeah. So I work for Aviva, which is the insurance company. I work in the pension side of things, so I'm the youngest person in my pensions team, but I do enjoy thinking long term about these sorts of things, and there are a lot, and we can get into this discussion later, but I've had a lot of experience with ESG funds and how we can work to make sure that we have green finance and a clearer and a better future, and also a more sustainable one. It's very interesting because as someone who does work in that area, I see an awful lot around when I might retire. That will be
makes you think about
me think about these things, and that's why I want to have that long-term view. Because 2069 sounds like a long time away.
But it will come round.
As things always do.
Yeah.
So, and you're currently a member of the City of York Council.
That's right, yes.
So, how long have you been doing that, and do you have particular responsibilities on the council, or particular interests that you pursue through your role as a councillor?
Yeah, so I was elected to the City of York Council in May 2023. So that was a big swing to the Labour Party nationally, but also a lot of highly localised work that we did in York, particularly around very local issues. I am a backbench councillor, I'm not in the executive. You can probably imagine the constraints on my time already would make that difficult, but very proud to support the executive and the cabinet we have in York. Particular areas of interest for me remain the economy and finance, but also on transport and sustainable transport. Now, I've said I think I might be one of the only candidates that doesn't have a car when it comes to North Yorkshire, and people have encouraged me to try and get one just so I can get up here. But I think if you want to, I come out and I say I care so much about public transport, particularly around the railways, but also around building that municipal bus service with David Scaife that we want to create. And I think you should try and live up to your own values and do what you hope other people will do as well. But particular area of interest, the economy, finance, and I'm a member of a planning committee, so I end up making quite large decisions related to.
And do you have a scrutiny role as well?
Yes, so I'm on. So because it's quite a small council, there's only 47 members altogether, so we all have to pull our weight and all work together. And York Labour has a majority of 1, so we have 24 seats for 47. So I'm on the Economy, Place, Access, Ability and Transport Committee, which covers all of my really areas of interest, but I'm also on this is a really big one, so I'm going to see if I can get it right, the Corporate Climate Change Customer Service Scrutiny Committee, I think. So it's a really, really big, wide-ranging committee. And the reason that the Climate Change Committee has come into the Customer Service and the Corporate Scrutiny Committee is because it's very much one and the same, because these values and these targets we've set for ourselves are now so ingrained. They're almost like corporate standards, basically, in the same way that councils are. So that's where I've been involved more recently in the changes. And I've also been a observer member of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Scrutiny Committee as well. So York has an observer status on there. We're not members, and obviously now we have our own combined authority, so it's a little different. But going over to West Yorkshire and seeing how colleagues work there really ingrained that sort of view that we need to have a one Yorkshire approach to quite a lot of the things that we do, particularly around the climate.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks
So
that's
a potted history.
That paints an interesting picture and background. Thank you.
And I was going to say, Conrad, have you been on your own journey in terms of understanding the impacts of climate change and coming on board with thinking about climate policies, or has that just been kind of ingrained throughout your life?
I think it has been throughout my life. It's always been a really big concern, because I'm sort of that first generation where we thought about climate change from the point when we were very young and we were told about it and taught it in school as sort of as something that we needed to be absolutely aware of. And it comes down to the fact that, look, I'm 24 years old, I'm going to be around, I hope, for a long, long time. And I don't want to be ending up in a world where the climate change and climate crisis is accelerated to such a point that the world is no longer livable in. And that's why I appreciate as well when I hear people from the older generations, and I've spoken to my grandma about this before she passed, and she was 95 years old and dead focused on wanting to do something about climate change because she thought about the world she was going to leave behind for her children, her grandchildren. And I think about the same if I ever get lucky enough to start a family. So it's been something I've always thought about, but I wouldn't say my journey has changed in the sense that I feel less about the severity. Of course I do, but in terms of sort of the policy and the way that we get there, I've definitely learned a great deal, and I've had great Labour colleagues on the council who've been able to guide me and tell me about that, but also community groups and the things that we do in York, but across North Yorkshire. And the way it relates as well to other policy areas, it's not like climate change policy should be its own separate brief. Climate should run through our transport policy massively, our business policy, our procurement policy, and particularly I'd say our economic policy, and then when it comes to home building as well, it should run like the climate concern should run like a stick of rock. Or word through a stick of rock on everything that we do. And that's how I've thought about it, rather than just sort of going in and thinking, here's the environment compared to everything else.
Yeah, no, thank you. Let's start on one of those topics, and you've mentioned transport as an area, obviously, that you are involved with and interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps if we start there, just looking at the Labour Party manifesto, there's some a reasonable amount there on decarbonising transport, but not very many specifics, I would say. And it would be really interesting to hear from you what you think we would need to do in the Harrogate and Knaresborough constituency to decarbonise our transport, because it's been the carbon emissions from transport have been very static. It seems to be one of those kind of difficult areas that hasn't really been tackled to date.
Yeah, and it's caused a lot of issues around air quality as well. That's and trying to highly localise it. When it comes to Harrogate and Knaresborough specifically, there's a range of things that we can do. I think that as the main example, now that we have the mayoral combined authority, we can look at instituting municipally owned bus service. So setting up a publicly run bus service that will allow you to lower costs. It will prevent the large subsidisation that's currently happening for private bus companies, and it will, I think, encourage bus use, because what you can do is you can align it with planning. Right now, the bus services kind of have to function as their own private company and can't be integrated into a transport policy. But if you've got Dave Skaith or the Combined Authority making decisions around, for example, the Station Gateway project or related to things around road networks, if we also run those bus companies, then the two things can work together very effectively and we can just move that along. Now, the reason I talk about buses, occasionally I get here people with a bit of a sigh, people who like to drive their cars or motorists or that sort of thing. And the argument I always say, it's two things. First of all, everyone should feel invested in the roads. So if there are potholes and problems like that related to that, if you're a cyclist, a pothole is so much worse for you than if you're a car, if you drive a car, but they're both really bad, and we can have that sort of solidarity around how we build our road networks. The second thing is, if someone absolutely has to drive, and I appreciate they're around accessibility issues sometimes or just convenience, but if you make the bus services as good as possible, then people who drive just because they feel that they have to and can't rely on the buses, or the buses are too expensive, they'll go and use the bus, so that there will be much clearer road for people who do need to use cars. And people do need to use cars. In York, we've particularly had an issue around blue badge access to the city centre. So obviously York, an ancient city, but in the same way that with Knaresborough, our ancestors did not think about accessibility when they designed their cities, unfortunately. But that's no excuse for us not thinking about it now. So making sure we do have that accessibility as well and balance those things. But huge fan of the idea of municipalising public transport and making it cheaper, so that we can have, lower that air quality, reduce that car dependency. It also needs to be done around cycle lanes. We need to make sure that the planning system is much more flexible and able to bring in things like cycle lanes, encouraging people to go to school by bike or go to work by bike. The cycle work scheme, I think, has been good, but there are other things we can do. And this is, again, I appreciate you talk about the Labour manifesto. We need to, that is a really important document, how the national government will work, of course, but then there are a huge number of things can be done locally. We're soon going to have the Harrogate Town Council set up, fingers crossed. When those elections come through, we can talk about what kind of powers we want and what kind of representatives we want at Harrogate Town Council to work to try and reduce our carbon emissions and green our transport here.
Thank you. So then thinking about our energy supply.
Yes.
And there is more in the manifesto about energy, actually. There's quite a good chunk about energy.
Yes,
isn't there?
it's my favourite area, actually, yeah.
So, again, it's a national manifesto, and don't expect you to have it committed to memory as yet, because it was only publicised a week ago.
Thursday, yes.
Yeah. It's a question for us really thinking about how that would apply locally, because at the moment we generate very little energy within the constituency. So effectively, as a constituency, we're an energy importer. Whether you have any thoughts in terms of how that policy, the national policy, would impact on us, and what you would do as a local MP
absolutely. Harrogate and Knaresborough is not alone. The whole country is an energy importer, and that's been a problem for us in the long run, particularly when it comes to fossil fuels. Not only do we need to be concerned about our environment and our climate, But this is also a sort of an additional moral aspect. We think about the regimes that we had to buy oil and gas from, the people who do not care about human rights, people who brutalise and subjugate their own populations. Buying oil and gas from them is just handing money over to them. It's the same with Putin's regime. After his invasion of Ukraine, energy prices shot up because it turns out large swathes of Europe have been relying on Russian gas for a very long time. Now, there is no clearer way of calling for climate reform and climate action than to say, even if it is someone like my reform opponent, for example, who's just said he doesn't believe in climate change, even if there is someone who's just so out there and says that, you can still say, look, we need to do this ourselves. We need to have a British-owned energy company that can generate clean energy here. Now, I'm really excited about GB Energy. It's a publicly owned company that's going to be set up, just for those who might not be aware, a publicly owned energy company set up, funded by windfall taxes on the large oil and gas companies that we know have made quite a lot of money out of the upshoot in prices. And that's going to be able to invest in clean power and clean energy. It'll also create 650,000 jobs as well, but it's going to deal with offshore wind, with nuclear energy, with solar and tidal. Now, in terms of how that will impact with regard to Harrogate and Knaresborough, obviously we don't have the coastline that would usually bring that sort of energy generation. So Scarborough and Whitby would probably do very well out of and be able to have their own energy around there, and also working around with that combined authority. But the simple fact is, when you're trying to do things like onshore wind, trying to make sure that you have the ability to put solar panels on your roofs and things, we need to make sure that there are the effective subsidies in there and the planning regulations in there as well. Now, the planning system, I think we all can agree, is broken at the moment. It was made set up in 1945, and it hasn't really been changed since. It was done sort of as a part of the rebuilding after the war. So Labour's plan to make sure we reform that and making it easier to do those wind, for example, wind turbine generations, but also solar, also with regard to nuclear, because Keir Starmer was talking about when he went to one of the wind farms in the UK, one of the offshore wind farms in the UK, and was talking about why it would take about 20 years to build it, because you had to get the planning permission through, you had to go through all of the regulations, and regulations are often there in order to make sure that there isn't unnecessary expansion into, for example, the countryside, and that everyone's done things by the book. But I think in this case, when we are in that emergency, I think emergency considerations ought to be taken into place, and that's why I'm a big fan of making sure the planning system is reformed as well, so that we can, for example, be able to look at generating clean energy here in our community. There's community energy networks that would be really important, and if we can become self-sufficient in energy, not only will we be able to lead the world in starting to export it, but we won't have to buy from these horrible regimes either.
But let's just unpack
that. That was a long
bit.
Yeah.
Because we've got these sort of relatively big sums of money in the manifesto, both for the Great British Energy and for National Wealth Fund as well. And I think there's a reference to thousands of local projects for energy generation. So, we need to be thinking, what's the handful of ones that would be in this constituency? So you talked about onshore wind being a possibility again, but does that go down to things like solar panels, or are there other ideas that we could be working on? Because obviously you'll look to the community to actually generate some of these ideas that can then bid for funding for these organisations. So have I got that wrong, or is that the sort of model that you're
that's the model as well. I think in terms of the bidding for funding, that there is sort of a general scepticism for some people around that regarding, I think we spoke about with the Levelling Up funding, it almost being like a Hunger Games effort to try and, people bidding for funding and authorities who might be even neighbours competing against each other. I think the Labour approach is a much more planned and structured one, so rather than just allowing individuals and individual local authorities to try and bid for things, that'd be more of an organisational effort to say where, for example, if Harrogate has got a real need and a real willing to do wind turbines as an example, then that would be an area where we'll invest in and work in, and GB Energy would be a part of that. But yes, in terms of the large sums of money, there is a lot of money out there when it comes to the profits that have been made on oil and gas, no doubt about it. And I don't think we should be afraid of saying that was a windfall, if you'll pardon the pun, and windfall taxes should apply there.
Okay. And what about sort of the other end of the equation of reducing energy use? Because, you know, in terms of our work, that's as important as generating energy, is looking where we can save energy. Can you talk a bit about that?
Absolutely. So Labour's got a big plan on home insulation around there. So we're wanting to make sure that the private sector, rented accommodation in particular, so people who live in private sector rented accommodation often have quite higher bills, particularly regarding turnover, the large amount of people that live there. So making sure that we get those insulation projects in. I think the target is by the end of the Parliament to have, I think it's a majority of in the private rented sector, that was out of the manifesto, properly insulated. Home insulation needs to exist. In terms of when we build new houses, I'm a big fan of the passive house design, which will be able to...
today?
Well, here we are, indeed, and it's lovely and toasty in here. So for me, insulation would be the main way of reducing energy. But also, as I've spoken earlier about transport, if we reduce those sort of fuel usage, but also, you know, electric cars as well, you know, it still takes up energy. And if you're stuck in a traffic jam with an electric car or stuck in a traffic jam with a petrol car, it's probably still as frustrating and wouldn't really work. So there are areas where we can encourage reductions in energy, but we're also going to continue to need to utilise it, of course, particularly for hopefully a growing economy and a fast-growing economy.
Well, I was going to say the retrofit area interests us a lot because we've been running a retrofit project for 2 years. We've got a member of staff who has been trying to build the close the gap between the skills, the lack of skills within the industry, getting more local people trained, and raising awareness for homeowners. And there are significant barriers, both on having enough people with the right skills and for homeowners being prepared to undertake the disruption. So I was quite interested in just drilling down into that a bit with you in terms of what policies you think might be able to leverage those changes, and take on board what you've said about new homes.
Yeah.
But actually, the majority of our homes are old homes.
Yes, they are indeed, yeah, and old and drafty to a large extent as well. So I completely understand that. Just in terms of the two things, actually, you mentioned skills. Now that's going to be super important. Right now, the skills that we do have a lot of sort of generational and ingrained skills in parts of the country that used to have a larger manufacturing base that we can transfer. But also, we need to make sure that we're encouraging the young people to get those skills together that we need. We need to make sure that those align. So in terms of Labour's policy of getting technical excellence colleges set up, encouraging young people to go into technical and vocational study. Now, I'm a big fan of that because I did a year in industry myself. It wasn't in a sort of a vocational or a construction area, but I definitely greatly enjoyed, as a part of my degree, being able to go and do work and get paid and develop those sort of soft skills that everyone's going to need. I like that Labour's got that policy of introducing more work experience within schools, so ensuring that every sixth former gets at least 2 weeks work experience every year. It's about building those soft skills that are going to be really useful and transferable, but having an industrial strategy and an organised plan around how we're going to get the skills. If we can get the young people educated and ready to start building, that will hopefully stop the problem. However, turning of course to the fact that most of these homes are existing, the problems that you can often encounter, again, come back to the planning system. So trying to get through planning permission, if you live in a listed building or a listed area, or even a building that you know, any building, you're still going to have to go through that long planning process. And I've seen, you know, as a member of the planning committee, I've seen the frustration when people have to go before a committee and kind of justify changes to their home. You know, it feels quite difficult and it feels very out of date. I appreciate large planning decisions should be taken by committees, but having to go through those hurdles is really difficult. So Labour's promised to reform and look at the planning system. I think we'll be able to incorporate a lot of things around making sure we strengthen retrofit and insulation, because retrofit and insulation are the ways that we're going to, I think, get through the climate crisis, get that energy consumption down. And then, you know, again, if we're imagining we're talking to that sort of reform person or that person that says they don't care about the climate or whatever, you can then say, well, your energy bills are going to be cheaper, you know, and making that economic argument. Because I'm very worried that the Conservative government have made this decision to say, net zero is going to hit people's back pockets and it's going to make working people worse off, so therefore we have to slow down. And it's like, well, first of all, it's going to make working people an awful lot worse off if we end up with a climate catastrophe on our hands. But also, it's going to be able to lower people's bills if we do net zero, right? If we get those retrofits in, people are going to succeed, and then you've got 6,500,000 new jobs. And then also you're going to be able to live in the advantage of having an energy secure country. And I think that the lack of long-term planning here, particularly, is a particular area where I remember this coming up around 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine and the energy prices shot up. A video surfaced of Nick Clegg, who was then Deputy Prime Minister, saying, we don't want to be able to build this new nuclear power station that they were discussing. And he said they don't want to do that because it won't come on power until 2022. And people in 2022 probably thought, you know what, it'd be good to be able to generate our own energy here in the light of that. And it's that lack of a long-term vision. So when Keir Starmer talks about a decade of national renewal, this isn't just a one parliament project. This is going to be a 2, hopefully 3 parliament project of a Labour government. Having that long-term vision and that long-term thinking is going to be so, so important. Because I know that I'm not going to want to look back and think that we did nothing when it came to climate, and I know that we are going to, I hope, make a really positive change.
Mm. Thinking of that long-termness, we know that the climate has already changed.
Yeah.
We're living in with the impacts of historic carbon emissions. So again, thinking locally. What policies would you advocate for local adaptation to a changed climate? We're getting wetter, warmer winters and hotter, more intense heat spells in the summer. And so just thinking through, again, the manifesto, Conrad talks about working with the local authority. And I'm conscious that if you're our successful candidate and become our MP, then we have a different political local authority in North Yorkshire. We'd have a Conservative, and I was going to say 2 things there for you really in terms of climate adaptation and navigating the relationship between a Labour constituency MP and a Conservative local authority.
So just on that sort of local authority area, we've also got the combined authority, which is going to have a lot of these powers as well. Particularly powers around jobs and homes and development is going to be run by the mayor, and a lot of those powers have been transferred. The combined authority is controlled by Labour. However, the combined authority itself, as I'm sure you're aware, just sort of for viewers, it's made up of the mayor, who's directly elected. Then it's the leader and deputy leader of North Yorkshire Council, and then the leader and deputy leader of the City of York Council. So as a result, because Pete Kilbane, deputy leader, and Claire Douglas, the leader of York Council, are Labour, that's how of the 5, they make a majority. However, and obviously we've only had a few months, or only about a month of actually functioning local authority before they had to go into that pre-election period, of combined authority rather. Carl Les, the leader of the North Yorkshire Council, has expressed great willing to want to be able to work together on them. They've not had any major disagreements so far where it's come to a vote and the 3 have had to use their majority, because we understand we do need to work together on this. And if I were lucky enough to be elected MP, yeah, it is good to hear. And Carl Les, I've not met the man. I don't want to sort of make projections onto what he does, but in local government, I think that if you're worried about your local area when it comes to things like and air quality and having a good transport system, it makes sense to go green and be climate ready, and also climate adaptation as well. We'll talk about that in a moment, but just sort of, I am capable of working closely with people who I disagree with politically. In fact, I think it's a good thing to do that. I've worked, for example, on developing changes to residents' parking with some, Green Party members have sort of informed me in York to an extent, and I've understood about that. So I'm more than capable of working across party, but also we have got that combined authority now that is Labour controlled. Now it's very strange to sit here in North Yorkshire and think it's Labour controlled, but it is a Labour controlled combined authority, and I have absolute faith in David Scaife and Claire Douglas to be able to provide that kind of leadership on the climate, and I think they would be great allies of mine if I were lucky enough to be elected. So can I just ask a bit further? I'm going to ask a bit of a question there around climate adaptation and climate readiness. Specifically, is that about accepting that the climate has changed to a large degree, therefore,
Yeah, so everything from our homes and our buildings not having sufficient guttering to cope with heavy rain events, so we're getting much more heavy rain events, so that then causes problems for homeowners, causes problems for our sewage system, drainage and sewage, doesn't it? Heat events means that we're starting to get schools closing on very hot days because they can't cope with the heat.
Infrastructure, you know, the rail system, you know, buckled rails and what have you. We've got the A59 falling into the valley because, you know,
Kexgill, there's a landslip that keeps occurring there because, again, rain patterns have changed.
Flooding, you know, and our food security.
Our farmers are really grappling with weather patterns that are just all over the place. So that affects our, yields. Even on the Archers they are discussing this.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
Oh, no, you can tell it's broken through to Middle England.
Winter wheat harvest down by 20%.
Goodness
me. So again, that feeds into our prices for, you know, and the impact that has on those on low incomes for the food in the shops. You know, we saw it.
It also feeds through just to disruption of businesses as well, because you know, the supply chains get affected by all of that sort of thing. So, you know, and we feel it's a sort of growing and slightly neglected area that we've got to sort of build our everything from our heads through to our, you know, through to our infrastructure to recognise this isn't going to get better any, you know.
Yeah, and it's a really difficult thing to sort of hear and think about. And even if we do, you know, in terms of reversing climate change, but making sure that we strengthen our all the things I've spoken about, ways of trying to improve our sort of carbon emissions and our energy supply. You know, looking at the reality of it, it can be really, really difficult right now. And these are massive problems, and having I don't want to make a party political point about this because I think that's not constructive, but I think it's more of an organisational point. What we need at times like this is a government that is capable of governing, right? It's someone who is going to be able to understand the breadth of these problems that we've outlined and say we need to be able to have the organisation ability in to fix them. Now, Keir Starmer, for me, is certainly that person because of his history of running large organisations, particularly around the police service in Northern Ireland. I know one of my first sort of campaign manager when I ran for council, he is retired now, but his job was working for the police service of Northern Ireland as it transformed from the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Incredibly hard job, massively hard job, particularly when you think about the community tensions there. But Keir Starmer was able to do that and able to overcome the complexities there. You need a government in place that isn't so focused on bickering and destroying itself and arguing. The Labour Party, I feel, is incredibly united. We've got this really strong laser-focused vision on improving people's lives. And when Keir Starmer is Prime Minister, you know, touch wood, which I sincerely hope he will be. And this is another part of my argument when I ask people to vote for me, it's to say, as far as we're concerned, or as far as I can tell, and I really hope that this happens, the Labour Party will win a majority. Is it not better for the town of Harrogate and for the constituency to have a government MP who will be able to make those arguments from the government benches rather than just having an opposition member of parliament who gets to shout from the sidelines? I trust that we've got a Labour Party that is going to be capable of delivering on changing these issues, and it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to be incredibly hard to do. And even talking about this adaptation is quite a nasty thing to talk about, isn't it?
Not easy.
Not easy at all. So having a government that is willing to face reality and willing to look up to these problems and step up to the plate is crucial to this. You need a leader who is capable of doing it, I would say. Right.
Let's kind of forget about the next 3 weeks and magic you into Westminster and land you there.
Yes.
What would you kind of ask of us as very active, passionate community organisation to help you in your task of representing the people of Harrogate and indeed of helping change hearts and minds locally, because I think we occupy a sort of respected position as non-party political in a very political area. How would you want to see us interacting with you and helping to achieve all of these things we've talked about?
So my view is democracy is a process and not an event. So it's not like the election happens and then that's democracy done for another 5 years. That's not how it works. I need to keep hearing from you, basically, regardless of what happens at the election. But fingers crossed, and I am elected. I'm going to continue to need advice. I'm going to continue to need you to develop these ideas that you have been doing. When you've got someone on the government benches who is listening for a climate-conscious government, it's going to be crucial that this organisation plays a role in providing the detail that we need to institute the kind of policies to deal with the enormity of the issue. On a local level as well, soon we'll have the town council. Now, local government, as we all know, struggles incredibly with funding, but at the local level, you can impact these sort of tighter, lower-level climate policies that we were talking about earlier, those community energy projects, for example. So it's really important to continue looking at, I think it's next year, possibly the year after Harrogate Town Council is set up, see what kind of powers they're going to have, see what kind of responsibilities they're going to have, and I would work with you as your MP to make sure we have a climate-conscious council as well. And, I'd say if we had a Labour council, but, that's by the by there. But also I accept that I am quite a young person, 24 years old. I will be 25 on polling day, so I'm not celebrating my birthday until long after. But so I'm going to need the advice, and I've learned that sort of over the years. I started off in politics thinking I had all the answers, and now I've realised that the best thing to do is know the people who've got the answers and got the opportunity to help. So I will always ask for advice. I will always listen, and I hope to be an MP that makes you feel not just feel represented, but see the things that you care about being delivered on.
And how do we hold you to account when we've sort of sent you're slipping from these fine words that you've laid out for us today? Because it's it's a difficult business being part of the political system, and sometimes we may feel that you're kind of pulling back from things that you've promised, and we want to be able to remind you of those sort of things. So how do we do that in a constructive way?
We've got the recording, so but tell me the truth. I regularly run drop-in sessions as a councillor. I don't know why MPs, some MPs just prefer not to, I suppose, but I will be running regular surgeries all across the constituency. Anyone can come in, talk to me about any issue. I invite you along. I really want to hear you to come and say that. And I fully expect it as well. The nature of being in government, it's not just the party political system, the nature of being in government is change, compromise must be made, things must change, occasionally, you may have to reevaluate priorities. Do that in consultation, obviously, with the people who have voted for you. But I think I can hear the truth, and I understand that sometimes tough decisions have to be made. But if you think I'm doing something wrong, I want you to tell me. In the same way that if you think that I'm doing something wrong now, I want you to tell me. It's a way of strengthening our democracy, is to feel that you can hold your elected representatives to account. So I don't want it just to be the case where you've got to wait for the general election to then get me out. Really, it should be more about how do we work constructively together, and that's something that my record shows I can do, and it's something I'm committed to doing as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming today. We'll see you again on Wednesday evening at our climate hustings. Do book online and put your questions to all the candidates for Wednesday evening. I think we close on Tuesday, Monday night, midnight.
Yeah,
to get questions in. It's been great to talk to you, get to know you a bit better, and best wishes for the rest of your campaign.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time, Conrad.